Hello everyone, welcome to another video. It's a long overdue video, but I'm back. I have some free time on my hands now, and I thought I'll give my take on the whole physical versus digital debate. It's not exactly what you think. I know a lot of content creators have given their take on it and made much more informative videos about which medium has more advantages, or I guess has certain advantages over the other. And I thought I'll get into a little bit more nuanced, details, and try to give my take on specific genres and specific cases where a physical or a digital purchase makes more sense. Before we begin, I think I wanted to break a myth, or I guess it's not a myth, but many people still carry this assumption that if you get a physical disc, then you're saving storage space because most of the game code and data is on the disc and it gets transferred over to your console storage, and sometimes it runs off the disc. That is true for anything before the Xbox VCR generation, 360, PS3. You have a lot of games that run off the disc. Some edge cases still lie in the current generation, but most of your meaty titles and big titles, their store versions are so updated and ahead of what's on the disc. Like the Gold Master that is on the disc is already outdated by the time you decide to play the game, and it's probably going to fetch everything from the server. So it's nothing more than just a DRM, license key. So physical games, barring a few exceptions, mostly is just a license key. There's some aspect of ownership to it. If the servers go down someday, you still have the version 1 of the game, but that also applies if stores allow for V1 of the games to run indefinitely. So a lot of gray area, but still I'd like to begin with sort of disclosing that information. Of course, all of this is subject to personal preference. I'm not saying any particular way is right or wrong. Anything that gives you joy, please continue to do so. If collecting gives you joy, please continue to buy physical games. But what I want to do here is to give a little bit more analytical thought on case-by-case basis. Now, let's start with sports titles. I think if you're someone who has some nostalgia for a very old release, some really old sports game like a FIFA 2000, I guess, or FIFA 2010 or UFC, some older release, and you don't mind missing out on, say, any of the seasonal content or the latest stuff that is coming out, the latest roster, the latest drafts, I think you're better off getting a physical edition of the game because it's so much more cheaper. You'll probably get it like a buck or two, sometimes used store, thrift stores. They're flooded with sports titles, and I think you should, if you're making a decision, make it an informed one where you're thinking, do you really want the latest seasonal content, and is that something you're looking for, or if you're looking for simple solo career stuff and a single player stuff, then I think it makes more sense to go physical. Of course, if you're someone who has to be updated and wants to play the latest seasonal content and you kind of don't want to miss out on any of the timed stuff, or if you're into any of the live service components of these games, like FIFA Ultimate Team, if you are into that, then you have no choice but to stick with the latest game. If you use that sport title as your second game or a secondary game, the whole idea of taking the disc out and putting it in is just an inconvenience. So at that point of time, I think a digital purchase makes more sense because you'll be playing your other main game and you're coming back to sports titles and hopping in and out. So that's where the digital makes more sense. Now, I wanted to come to the second category of games, which is military shooters. And I think this one is interesting because let's first address the biggest edge case or exception to this whole category, and that is the Call of Duty franchise. Now, COD has an ardent fan base, and all of those people play all generations of the COD games to this day. Some play the multiplayer, some play the single player, and all of these games have a significant amount of player base, I would say. So therefore, their physical releases hold their value or the price value for a long time, even pretty strong after years of the release. Digital sale prices are also never too dramatically low. You have these spring, summer sales, winter sales, but then Activision is kind of known to be not reducing the prices of these games too much. I mean, that's where the whole decision making will come into picture. Because if you want the Call of Duty for a single player experience and you also like collecting games and owning games, then my suggestion would be to come back to the franchisee like every 2 generations or every 2 releases. What's going to happen is after every 2 or 3 years or 3 versions of the game, you'll start seeing perceivable amount of price drops in their physical releases. If you're not a collector and you want to get all of the latest Warzone and Call of Duty seasonal content, then stick with digital. If you care about just casual multiplayer fun and you don't mind playing anything that's a little bit older and that still has a player base, then I would say go for physical releases that are 2 to 3 years old, because they still have a multiplayer player base, especially if it's a mid-console life cycle game. Like I think Black Ops 4 right now, you're still gonna find players in that game and you'll still have a community. So you could get that game from a used copy, and you could find like a used version of that game for maybe 30 to 40% less than what the retail pricing is on the stores. Now, addressing every other shooter in the market, which is not Call of Duty, military shooters, I think Battlefield being the biggest example. These games are known to drop heavily in their price, even after a year into the release. So it's insane how much they drop. So if you're a collector, if you're okay with getting, say, a year or 2 years old release, definitely wait for it. Now let's come to the other category, which is live service games. And this is particularly interesting because this includes things like, looter shooters, even all your battle royales like Warzone. I didn't mention it in military shooters, but Warzone is kind of like a ever evolving thing. And, these are forever games. All kinds of MMORPGs, and also games that require a live service component to even play the single player game. Like the campaign, you still gotta be signed into service, like I think Outriders or Diablo. Fundamentally, these are forever games that is doing nothing from the physical disc. What it's doing is it's just a license check, and if you really want to quickly get in and out of these games, I would suggest going for a digital version. Now there are some exceptions to this. Looter shooters or like Destiny in particular, I think because it's an evolving franchise, and Destiny and Division, these kind of games, if you are someone who wants to get a complete package of the game and are okay with waiting and playing, say, the first version of the game when currently the second version is going on, like Division 1, right when Division 2 is actively being developed, or Destiny 1, when right now Destiny 2 is what's current, then I would suggest going for physical, because I've seen these compiled and ultimate editions or legendary editions of these games with all of their DLC included in the disc go for cheap prices. And I think you can get really killer deals on older live service games which are still supported. So I picked up a used copy of Division for like $7. And even with like a crazy digital sale, like a summer sale or a winter sale, you'll never be able to get those prices. So my suggestion for that is wait. Once you start going and playing these earlier versions, you start getting the best experience. Like it's the most stable, no performance issues, and all of the content has been tested and updated, and it's you're playing the best version. So I kind of have gotten into this habit of, picking up these games when they're at the end of the life cycle. And I always have a good time. I know people have made guides and people have made resources, and it's so much more smoother experience. People know what works, what doesn't, and you just have the best version to just experience. Now let's talk about the other big category, which is Western RPGs, things like, all the Bethesda games. And to be honest, there's a lot to gain if you're going digital on these games. If you wait for like these big summer sales or winter sales, I think you're better off with a digital purchase, because you can get crazy prices and discounts on these games if you go digitally. And most of the times, if you're a subscriber of a subscription service like Game Pass or PS Now, you'll be able to experience a lot of these games for like absolutely bargain prices. So like per month, if you're paying $10, you experience 2 big RPGs in a month. You're set. If you wait around a year, a lot of these big releases, Western RPGs, drop in price significantly. There's one aspect to it which I think specifically applies to people who like to cherish physical artifacts and a fond memory or a fond moment in gaming, and that's why I like to own certain games. So for my case, like Skyrim, I have a special edition copy that I got for a used price, and I got it for like super cheap. But now I have something that represents my entire Skyrim journey, like 50 to 60 hours that I spent in that world. And these are so story driven and heavy games, narrative heavy games, that it makes more sense to have and own this. Coming to the other part of this whole equation, which is JRPGs, the Japanese role-playing games. I think this is pretty straightforward. From what I've analyzed, if it's a big AAA JRPG release, it makes total sense to skip on the physical release. I have found JRPGs from even big companies like Square Enix or Capcom, like Dragon's Dogma or something like that. If you really want to wait for a year or two, you would get like bargain prices on these games. Like Final Fantasy VII, the remake has already gone on like PS Plus as a free game. Game Pass has like a plethora of games, like I think Final Fantasy 15 was it on for some time, Monster Hunter World. So yeah, it's crazy. If you do want to go physical, look out for smaller publishers and smaller JRPG releases, which are from like companies like Nihon Falcom or like NIS America or Marvelous. All of these companies, these are smaller companies that put out a lot of effort and passion in their retail editions of their games, like the games that they're publishing, because they have to appeal to the general audience. And what they do is they make up for lack in marketing with a better retail package. So you'll often find like soundtracks in it, some kind of small art books, even in their retail editions. These games generally don't get updated that much. The gold master that exists on the disc is essentially what's the game going to be like even in the future. Now let's come to the other big exception to this whole category of games, and that is Nintendo exclusive games. It's such a big anomaly in the industry. Like, as Nintendo games in their physical format, they hold on to their price value for so long and for an insane amount of time. It'll be hard to find like a decently priced version of their games. If you're like one of those who values their game as assets, appreciating or depreciating, whatever be the case, I think Nintendo games are a safe bet to buy physically. The turnaround value or the flipping returns are much higher. And if you are someone who just wants to play old games, Nintendo games, I would suggest go digital or an emulator road. I think Nintendo games never again go on big sales, excluding sort of their IPs that are in collaboration with other publishers. Like I think Mario plus Rabbids is like a collaboration with Ubisoft. So that game goes on sale frequently, but you'll never find like most of their big releases like, you know, Pokemons and their Zeldas and Marios. Picking up physically makes sense. You can buy a used copy and you'll have some savings. But my suggestion personally at this point of time in my life is that think about the game that you're buying. If you're not a hardcore collector, put a lot of thought into what franchises appeal to you the most. I was shocked recently to find that I just have lost my love for Pokemon games. Even like Legend of Zelda, and I don't know, I recently with the Xbox Series X that I have purchased, I'm leaning more towards, you know, smaller indie titles, maybe some AAA releases here and there, which are for a little bit more mature audiences. Yeah, I'm just not interested in Nintendo games anymore. Things like any Zelda themed rhythm game that's coming out, you know, I don't have the FOMO to go and pick up that copy. Now, coming to the last category of games, I know this has been a long video, but you know, I wanted to get this out because I want to continue the conversation and discussion around the nuances when it comes to physical and digital, where it makes more sense. And if you're not someone who's a hardcore collector, wants to have a trophy list of, you know, games in their physical collection, give some more thought to it, or at least, you know, drop a comment below and, you know, ask me. Maybe I'll have some opinion and advice on it. Indie games, the last category. This one is a hard one. Indie games have now finally broken the boundaries it had previously. especially on PC. I think earlier it used to be really hard to discover these hidden gems and these underrated games, but now with like Steam's discovery system and like whole recommendation system, so many content creators picking up these small games, both on, you know, streaming platforms or YouTube for that matter, it's not that hard to run into several good recommendations. Butterfly effect of that has been that all of these storefronts, digital storefronts, Steam, Epic, they have started getting a lot more eyeballs on these games, and therefore there's a lot more visitors, and they can reduce down the ticket price of individual games. So you'll end up seeing a lot of release sale prices on indie games, big and small. It's always suggested or advised to wait for a big sale on these games, wishlist them, get a notification, and you know, it doesn't have to be that you have to play the game right now. If you're that kind of a person, yeah, all of this doesn't apply to you. But my suggestion would be to, you know, wishlist them, wait for a sale, and get those games digitally. For consoles, it's a little bit different because indie game physical releases are far and few in between. Like all of the games don't get physical releases, but the ones that do, sometimes they're in low print, sometimes they're done by these, you know, exclusive online distributors, like, you know, limited run games, special reserve games, super rare games, all of those. I know if those companies are kind of producing these copies, then sure, give some thought, pick the game that resonates most with you, and go for the physical release if you can, you know, get your hands on one. Don't pay inflated prices on them. I know if you're not a hardcore collector, going to eBay and getting these insane prices on these limited run games is just not worth it. And be fully committed to a game that you want to get a physical release of. I'll give you an example, like Disco Elysium, the RPG, which just recently became a cult hit, I think. I am really looking forward to the physical release of that game, and I'm fully committed to it. Like, I want to get the final cut version that has been announced for consoles, and there's going to be a physical release, so I'm waiting for it. But that's it. That's the only game that I want to pick up physically, and I'm not going to go hunt down every single release that comes out on limited run or special reserves games or all of that. I'm picking my fight. I'm picking my decisions very thoughtfully. Again, at the end of the day, it's all your money. How you spend it is, you know, your discretion and your decision. Physical releases that you should look out for if you're a hardcore collector are, you know, visual novel games and Metroidvanias, platformers. These games typically sell out very quickly, and if you're a hardcore collector, look out for those games because typically they might also have low print run. So yeah, there you have it, what you should expect if you want to collect versus own games in any of these specific categories. I know I have missed a lot of genres and I've missed a lot of other categories, but I think this should give you a fair bit of idea of what to expect. For everything else, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'll give out my handle in the description. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for joining in. If you stuck for this long, thank you for doing that. It helps me out. I'll see you in the next one. See ya.